Will the Blackhawks finally move on from Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews in the near future? We're going to be discussing some potential interesting landing spots for the two before the end of this season. Plus, we have some big signings, including Kakko and Ethan Bear, several news on the NHL coaching front, as well as big news out of the NHL regarding their contract with Adidas, who supplies all of the jerseys and apparel. We'll discuss all that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade rumors to take a look at here today. First up, we have some signings to discuss. The New York Rangers have come to terms with RFA forward Kakko. The former number 2 overall pick gets a 2-year contract valued at $2.1 million for his average annual value. The contract structure will be paying him a $1.8 million salary in year 1 and a $2.4 million salary in year 2. So, of course, his qualifying offer for his next contract will be based on that final year's salary of $2.4 million. Kakko is really yet, in my opinion, to really break through and show his full potential. We'll see if he can take another step here this season. I know in the playoffs we saw him have some more success with playing on a kid line with Hedel and Lafreniere. Of course, the Rangers' cap situation is getting awfully tight now, and I believe they have 22 players under contract as of right now, so I don't expect a whole lot more news out of the Rangers organization, but there could be some more tweaking and some more another couple signings or two, but nothing too significant at this point. The Carolina Hurricanes have signed young defenseman Ethan Bear. He gets a 1-year deal valued at $2.2 million. Of course, the right shot defenseman battled COVID last year, seemed to have a harder time coming back. A lot of discussion about whether he wanted a trade. There's a lot. I've seen different talk and different reasons given for his absence later in the season into the playoffs. Some claim he was a healthy scratch. Others say he was dealing with like a long COVID or still COVID symptoms, and that was the reason. I'm not really sure what exactly is the for sure 100% truth on that, but there was talk that he may want out of Carolina. Now that he's under contract, be interesting to see if another team comes calling or how that's going to work out. I do think if Ethan Bear's fully healthy and fully recovered, he should be able to easily get back to playing a top 4 role. And after the moves that we've seen the Canes make, I don't know if he's going to get that there. So we could see a trade later on. Only time will tell. The Vegas Golden Knights have re-signed young forward Braden Paschal, who's 22 years old. He was an undrafted right-shot defenseman who signed with the Vegas Golden Knights a couple seasons back. Of course, he's mostly played in the American Hockey League, but has also appeared in 2 NHL games for Vegas here recently. So he's now officially under contract for one more season in Vegas. Lots of news on the coaching front. The New York Islanders are hiring John MacLean as an assistant coach to work with Lane Lambert. Of course, he previously worked in San Jose, most recently with Bob Boughner. It's nice to see some of the coaches in San Jose getting work after the late firing right before they announced Mike Greer as the general manager there. They cleaned house with the coaching staff. So Boughner got on in Detroit, and then John MacLean gets on here in Long Island. So that's certainly great to see. Of course, John MacLean has a long history with Lou Lamoriello. A lot of familiarity from their time in New Jersey. Of course, John MacLean was a longtime player and coach there previously as well. It's believed that he's replacing Brian Wiseman, who had been previously announced to be joining the coaching staff working along with Doug Huda, but apparently Wiseman is not going to be joining the staff any longer. So John MacLean will be taking his place. The San Jose Sharks have also hired Ryan Warsovsky as an assistant coach as well. He was in the running when they were determining who their new head coach was going to be before they settled on David Quinn. So Warsovsky will come along and work with Quinn as an assistant coach. Of course, he's coached in a few other situations before, but most recently was the head coach for the American Hockey League Chicago Wolves, who were this past season's Calder Cup champion. So obviously leading his team to the championship has earned himself some good recognition, and get a bump here to the NHL to work as an assistant. The San Jose Sharks also announced today that number 12 will be going to the rafters this season. No huge surprise there, but longtime Shark and all-time games played leader in not only the San Jose organization but in the entire league, Patrick Marleau, will have his number retired on February the 25th, 2023, when San Jose plays host to the Chicago Blackhawks. So that's certainly a well-deserved situation there for Marleau. Of course, one of the all-time greats in league history, in obviously Shark history. Had quite a run with the all-time games played, obviously record, and then of course he was a long-time NHL Ironman for quite a stretch there as well. So Marleau certainly deserves all the accolades after a very long, very successful career. I think the only thing that was missing was that elusive Stanley Cup, but otherwise he was one of the best for a long time. So well-deserved honor to see that. Not a surprise that they would make that the decision here so quickly, of course, after the career he had. And other coaching news, the Philadelphia Flyers have hired Rocky Thompson to be an assistant coach with newly appointed head coach John Tortorella. Of course, Rocky Thompson also previously worked with Bob Bugner in San Jose, but he had left the San Jose organization earlier. Rocky Thompson, of course, got his start as a head coach way back in the OHL with the Windsor Spitfires. Had a good run there. Worked his way up to be an assistant coach with the Edmonton Oilers for, I believe it was 5 or 6 years. And then he became a head coach at the American Hockey League level, and then worked his way back up. And then he went to San Jose, now goes to Philly. So he'll have Rocky Thompson and Bradshaw will be the two assistants for Tortorella. And of course, most recently here, Rocky Thompson went back to the junior ranks and helped out as an advisor with the St. John Sea Dogs, who were hosting and ultimately won the 2022 Memorial Cup Championship Tournament for the top junior team in Canada, in Canadian hockey. So certainly, something else that looks good on his resume here as well. And the Montreal Canadiens have added Stefan Robida to their coaching staff to work with Marty St. Louis. And of course, he also has Alex Burrows still there. But of course, Robida will replace Luke Richardson, of course, who departed to take the head coaching position with the Chicago Blackhawks. So Robida will be responsible for working with the defense and the penalty kill. Of course, Robida was a longtime NHL player himself. And then worked in, I believe it was in player development for the Leafs organization for about 5 or 6 years as well prior to this. So he's certainly another, capable, well-experienced hockey person deserving of the opportunity there as well. And as I mentioned, we also got some surprisingly big news as well, broken by ESPN and Greg Wyshynski here today. But the contract with NHL and Adidas to provide their jerseys and other apparel will not be renewed. The contract's a 7-year deal, which takes them to the end of next year. So that's 23-24. So, of course, we have the 22-23 season coming up. So they have this year and next. The contract will be finished, and it's not going to be renewed. That request to not renew it was initiated on the Adidas side. So it's not a case of the NHL not being pleased with the products or unhappy or anything of that nature. But it's certainly a case of Adidas, I guess, wanting to go in a different direction. So we'll have to see. I mean, that's going to be a short run. Obviously, prior to that, Reebok had the rights for 10 years. So obviously, the NHL's already begin to make it known to other suppliers and other athletic companies that these NHL rights for apparel and jerseys are going to be up for grabs again here in the not too distant future. So we'll have to see once the negotiations begin, what companies become interested or make bids for this. We'll have to see, and it could be a good moneymaker for the NHL. And I know the Adidas jerseys have been pretty popular amongst collectors. They've been, a nice product. I think no matter who there's always something you can critique and pick at that you want to be, nicer or whatnot. But we'll see. I'm not sure. As far as I know, it will have no impact on the Fanatics brand. Of course, they have a contract. They run the NHL.com e-commerce site and all that. So I don't think the relationship with Fanatics is changing in any way at all. But obviously, the Adidas contract will be expiring. So it'll be interesting to see who the new partner is going to be in that regard. I don't know really who it could be. So we'll have to wait for more information on that here in the coming days and weeks as we move forward. It's hard to say when news will come on that since it's so far into the future. But time will tell. Now, of course, the big news I want to talk about here as well is the potential landing spots for Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. Now, the information I'm going to talk about here today comes from Dave Poulin, longtime NHL player, currently works for TSN as an analyst. Some of the things he was talking about on TSN radio, about some potential landing spots. And keep in mind, the teams we're going to talk about, which I'm sure you likely saw some giveaways here from the thumbnail, so you know who I'm going to kind of pinpoint. But at the same time, keep in mind that as the season goes along, the salary cap requirements change as we get closer to the deadline. Of course, teams can retain 50% salary, and there could be third-party brokers retain an additional 50%, really knocking those cap hits down. So, of course, Toews and Kane both have matching $10.5 million contracts. They're entering the final year. It's pretty much a given at this point based on recent comments from Jonathan Toews, comments from the organization, that both are very, very likely to be moved before the conclusion of the 22-23 NHL trade deadline. So obviously it could happen sooner. Maybe a team makes a move or really gets on Chicago to jump the gun if they really want to get on one of these players. But it could be some of the big names that we see at the deadline this year. It makes sense, to be honest, that they wait given how the cap works and the requirements for late season additions and all that. So we'll have to see here. But Patrick Kane, the team that Poulin brings up as being a logical destination in his opinion, is Tampa. Now, of course, the Tampa Bay Lightning won back-to-back Stanley Cups, lost this past year to the Avalanche, and you know what? They're not satisfied. They're a group that you can guarantee will be doing everything they can to push to try to get back in the hunt for yet another Stanley Cup. You know that they're fierce competitors and that they're not happy that they lost in the Stanley Cup final this past season, and they didn't get that number 3 consecutive cups here. Obviously, they have one previous cup in their history, so they want that 4th cup in team history. This group, Stamkos, Kucherov, Vasilevsky, Hedman, and all the other guys that are still going to be there, along with a few new additions, they're going to be hungry. And adding a guy like Patrick Kane, can you imagine? Yes, they lost some players this past year in free agency that they couldn't retain due to a tight cap situation. They lost Andre Palat. They lost Jan Ruda. Obviously they re-signed Nick Paul. They added Brandon Hagel, and he's under contract. They still have Maroon, Perry, etc. But can you imagine adding Patrick Kane to work in a top 6 that already includes Braden Point, Steven Stamkos, Nikita Kucherov? That's pretty crazy. So Kane would be an absolute dynamic addition to that lineup. There is no doubt. I don't know exactly where he fits, but he can play either side as the wing. He's even played a little bit of center at times, generally not a position you see him do it. He can do it. Not that they really would need him to, but either way, he's a versatile player in that sense. So obviously Patrick Kane could be, now I suspect that the Lightning would not be the only team in the mix. But when it comes to big names like this, the 2 teams in the last couple of years that you continuously hear being in the mix were the Lightning and the Avalanche. They're the teams we saw at the NHL trade deadline. I'm sure Colorado was one of the first teams, I know according to Elliot Friedman, back even in the past season, that were inquiring, trying to see if they could get their hands on Patrick Kane. So Tampa's going to have lots of competition. Ultimately, Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, if they move on, which, like I said, it's widely expected, they're not going to want to stay in Chicago to go along with this rebuild beyond the current season that's coming up. And ultimately, they have a no-move clause. So they have a lot of control over where they go. So they're going to have a lot of say based on who's interested and what they're going to do. So, I'm sure Kane would probably entertain teams that are, in the mix for a cup. And remember, it's only a short-term rental situation. He can then become a free agent and decide where he wants to go to continue his career for the next few years. So, I know when we talked about Kane maybe going to Edmonton a few days ago, there were some comments scarfing at that idea, saying he's never going to want to go there. It's like, you know what? Depending on who wants to pick him up at the deadline, you'd be amazed. I mean, if he really thinks he can go win a Stanley Cup, he might do it. I mean, it's only for a few months, right? So it's not like he's got to go there and stay for a long time. I don't see Patrick Kane signing with the Edmonton Oilers and staying for 3-4 years or anything like that. I mean, that would be surprising. I think it's reasonable to think he might accept a trade there to play with guys like McDavid and Draisaitl and maybe have a shot at a cup. That would be a lot of fun for a guy like him. And I've also seen some people say that he's got his cups. He may not be really, pushing for that. And you know what? These guys are competitive guys. And I think if they're going to accept a trade, they're going to want to go to a place where they can win. That's what they're used to doing. That's why they don't want to stay in the rebuild in Chicago, is that they're used to winning. They're, spoiled in that sense, but they were been part of some great teams, and they want to get back to that. So ultimately, why wouldn't they? They're fierce competitors. They want to win, right? So at the end of the day, Patrick Kane to Tampa, to me, doesn't seem unrealistic. So if you think about it, Chicago keeps half the money. That knocks it down to $5.25 million. They get a third-party broker team. Yes, it's going to be more expensive, but we know Tampa's not afraid to spend picks and prospects in order to make things happen to get another Stanley Cup. They've given away a lot and still won a lot, so they've kind of got it down to a fine science on how they can do that. So they could end up getting Patrick Kane for like under $3 million. So it's not unreasonable to think that on their cap that it couldn't work. They wouldn't have to move out a whole lot of money. So it's certainly reasonable that it could be done. Now, in the case of Jonathan Toews, Poulin goes on to mention Pittsburgh being a good destination for him. Ultimately, being that number 3 guy, probably in the center position behind Crosby and Malkin, assuming everybody's obviously healthy. That plays a big role. Of course, Toews has played with Crosby at the Olympics in the past. I know somebody he probably looked up to a little bit, being a few years behind him coming into the NHL. So, obviously, at this rate, Jonathan Toews really could be an excellent number 3 player. He's never been a superstar offensive dynamo. I mean, he's known, when he was young, he was kind of known as being a shootout specialist. I know from his time in junior hockey and in the Olympics and the World Juniors, like he's done a lot of nifty moves to the shootout. It seemed like he was always money in that situation. But at the same time, at the NHL level, he's been good offensively, but never a real big superstar. Like, if he can be 60, 70 point player, that's about the best you're going to get out of Jonathan Toews. But he does a lot of other things well, like shutting down the opposition's top players. So ultimately, having a guy like Toews as well could even allow the Penguins to load up their top lines maybe a little bit more as well, knowing that they could put out a line too that could be more of a shutdown line, right? Because if your shutdown line is going to have to play a lot. Once upon a time, you used to see more of a third line role for that, checking line. But now, you almost need to have that as your second line because you have to play against the other team's opposition. You want them out there more. So you need guys that can be more solid two-way players to be more effective in that role. So I think Pittsburgh could be a really interesting destination for Jonathan Toews. And if you think about it, if they do the same sort of thing as Tampa, and we know Pittsburgh's never been afraid to mortgage the future to win now. They've been trying to do it and been successful at it a bunch of times. A few other times it hasn't worked. But realistically, if you think about adding Jonathan Toews to that mix, they got Jason Zucker, 1 year left at $5 million. If they move on from him, or they move Kasperi Kapanen, who we know hasn't been the most, best fit there, who hasn't really lived up to his expectations, they could easily figure out a way to make this happen. So don't think the cap hit is really going to play that huge of a role. It's going to cost a bigger price tag. They're going to have to give away some more picks and prospects, but it could certainly be done. And we can easily see these two teams really having a bit of an arms race in the East to go along with other top teams. To me, the Eastern Conference is going to be an absolute bloodbath getting out of there this season coming. I think there's a lot of teams that it's going to be, to me, you're still going to have your teams like last year, like Carolina and the Rangers and Tampa, Toronto, Florida. You're going to see some new teams maybe get involved a little bit. Maybe Ottawa, Detroit, who knows? Obviously, you get Pittsburgh, Washington. Will the Islanders get back in it? It's hard to say, right? But there's going to probably be 6 or 7 teams that you could probably pick as a potential Eastern winner. And it's going to be a long, hard-fought battle, and it's just going to come down to a war of attrition, in my opinion. So getting these guys on your team might be a huge advantage. So we'll have to see what happens here, but I do think that Poulin's on to some good points. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. We don't know what the returns would be. There would have to likely be third parties involved. It's going to be complicated, but it's just something fun to talk about and entertain the thought process here for today. Can you imagine these players on these teams? I think it could easily happen, just a matter of how it all works and what's all involved. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.